morning, everybody.
Good morning.
We're going to go ahead and get started.
No, I was talking.
I know you was.
You didn't say, hey.
I said good morning.
You didn't say, shut up, Bob.
I'm trying to be nice this morning.
How are you?
No. We are actually going to start the book of Habakkuk. Huh?
She left with that one, didn't she?
Habakkuk.
Yeah.
So, yeah, to begin with, Habakkuk, however it is that Jerry says it, which is different than either one of those. I've always called it Habakkuk, and so I love Habakkuk. It's the first book that I ever preached out of. So my very first time I ever preached was out of this book, and I went online, and because most of the time if I'm reading through genealogies and different things like that, I am going to bluff my way through every single name. I'm gonna pretend like I know how it sounds, and we're gonna, bluff my way through it. But I wanted to make sure I was trying to pronounce it right, and I was like, most people probably say Habakkuk, so I tried to teach myself to call him Habakkuk constantly. And then I went online, and I was like, how do you pronounce Habakkuk in Hebrew? And it was like Habakkuk. And I'm like, I don't have that guttural in the back of my throat like they were trying to do. But I'm like, Habakkuk. Close enough, right? Like that's the English trend. So we're going, I'll probably actually call it both Habakkuk and Habakkuk because my brain's confused now and it doesn't know how I tried to pronounce it. So, but we're gonna be in Habakkuk probably for, 4 to 6 weeks. It would be my guess. It's 3 chapters. I tend to talk a lot, so I'm gonna guess 4 to 6 weeks. But today we're gonna kind of do, I don't really want to say the boring stuff, but we're gonna do the background information, the cultural information, all of the stuff that, especially if you have ever been, which I think only a few of you have, back when we were doing the women's discipleships and we would start a book, you'd hear me talk a lot about how important it is when you're doing Bible study to know who wrote the book, when did they write the book, when did the events happen, what was going on in the culture, what was going on in the nation of Israel, what was going on politically in the greater area. Because when we know those kind of things, it brings so much more to life when we're reading. We understand it. If I were to tell you, hey, I've really been struggling, I've really been calling out to God here lately, you would understand that because you've struggled and you've had to call out to God, right? But would you understand where I was? You would understand where you have been in that situation, but you wouldn't really understand where I was. But what if I told you, hey, I lost, and you didn't know me very well, but hey, I lost my child last year, and then I went through a divorce, and I lost my home. And I've been crying out to God because I don't know where else to turn. You're going to begin to understand the depths of my feelings. You're going to begin to understand where I am coming from a whole lot more when you understand the situations that I'm in, when you understand the culture around me. We could talk to people in countries where Christianity is not so free as it is here. And when they begin to tell us, hey, I had to worship in the rubble, I had to worship hidden, and if I didn't, hide the word in my heart, well, then I could have been arrested for having. And we begin to understand more where they're coming from when they say certain things. And so I think it's extremely important to understand the background when we get into Scripture, because if we don't, I think we lose a lot. And so that's, it's just something that I tried to teach a lot. It's something I try to impress upon people a lot. And so I told Larry a couple days ago, I'm probably going to bore people Sunday morning. And he said, just remind them it's Sunday school. He said, sometimes we need to just sit and learn. It's not always, I can't always go to the Scripture and go, okay, well, this is about me. How am I going to get what I need today out of this? Sometimes I have to go, hey, this is about Habakkuk and what's going on with him. And once I understand what it's telling me about God and what it's telling me about how one of his men interacted with him and how they interacted together, well, then I can go, hey, there's a lot I can take from that. There's a lot I can learn from that. But if I don't look for God first, then I'm studying the Bible wrong. If I don't look for Jesus first, if I don't look for the character of God first, and I go in looking for how is this going to fix me today, then I think that I'm Bible studying wrong. I am making it a very me-centered Bible instead of a very God-centered Bible. And the Bible is a story of God. It's a story of God and how he deals with his people, and I am one of those people. So obviously, but him first, always. And some of that comes in with knowing the background, knowing the culture, knowing who wrote it, when he wrote it, what kind of book it is, all of those kinds of things. What's the theme of the book? What's the big idea? You know, those kind of things. So that's what we're going to talk about this morning with Habakkuk. So who wrote the book? Habakkuk.
Book.
Yeah, Habakkuk. Habakkuk wrote the book. Well, who was he? Who was Habakkuk? Well, we don't really know. Because the Bible doesn't really tell us, other than in the book of Habakkuk, the Bible does not mention him at all. He is not mentioned anywhere else. But based on the book, there's a lot of things that we can kind of infer. We know that he's a prophet of God. He's one of the minor prophets. Interestingly enough, this book is not a prophetic book like we think of when we think of Isaiah, when we think of Jeremiah, when we think of, Ezekiel and all of these, even the minor prophets of Nahum and Amos. And this one's completely different. In this book, in most prophets, it's the prophet going to the people and talking to them about God, right? Or talking on behalf of God. Well, in this book, it's the prophet going to God and talking about the people. So we see when we talk about the genre of the book, most people would just say this is prophecy. It's a prophetic book, and it is. However, it's really a dialogue between the prophet and God. And then God speaks back, and that's what it is. It's this beautiful dialogue. And then in the 3rd chapter, we see this beautiful psalm and different things like this. But we don't know a whole lot about Habakkuk, other than he was a prophet of God. We know that we don't know his family. We don't know where he was from. We know he lived in Judah, right? Because this is the time period, and we'll get to that in a minute. We know that he was a contemporary. He lived about the same time that Jeremiah, Zephaniah, probably a little bit before Daniel and Ezekiel. They may have been alive at the same time, but Daniel and Ezekiel's books would have come after Habakkuk's. But so we know that he lived in that time period, which is the time period probably from Josiah to Jehoiakim, and we'll talk about them in just a minute. But that's the time period that we believe that he would have been an adult, a grown man. He was probably, some people say he was probably good friends with Jeremiah. I have no idea if he was good friends with Jeremiah. But we know that they prophesied around the same time.
They had to cross paths.
Huh?
They had to cross paths.
We would assume that they definitely crossed paths. Jeremiah.
Well, I think that comparably that it would be kind of like, so a prophet or a prophetess is one who speaks from God to the people, right? That would be the explain the message. The people of God. It's kind of like you. So Habakkuk would be compared to Jackie, in Ward, Arkansas, compared to, you got Billy Graham. You've got all of these other major.
Well, here's the thing. So that is one of the main things that when we talk about the major prophets and the minor prophets, it is not a difference in their popularity.
No.
It is not a difference in their renown that more people knew them. It is simply, we call the major prophets because their books are long. We call the minor prophets because their books are little. There was no difference in we don't know how much Habakkuk went out and prophesied. We do know that he did. We do know that he was a prophet. Some people actually believe that he was a Levite also, because at the end of Habakkuk, in the 3rd chapter, it talks about the singing and him leading with his instruments and things, and that was a Levitical priest's job. And so some people infer, and I say infer because I am not telling you that this is truth, but there is a reason to think that He may have been a little Levitical priest who was called as a prophet also, which made his ministry much harder, because to be a priest and a prophet, there was only a few of those that God called that did both. But I don't know. I don't know whether he was. I had no opinion. I can see where they, kind of come up with that inference, where they think that it could be possible, but I'm not going to tell you that he is. I don't know. All I know is he talked to God, and God talked to him. And the things that he says, I think we can learn a lot from the conversations that they had. Habakkuk means to hug. So this is, or to wrestle. It can mean both. And this is kind of the to hug or to wrestle or to cling to, as opposed to hug, to cling to. And we actually see this played out in the book of Habakkuk. We see Habakkuk struggling with some things and having to wrestle with God, to wrestle with these ideas that he had of who God is, but what he was seeing did not seem to match what he expected God to do. And so he's wrestling with this, like, how do I put these together? But in the end, we just see him embracing. We see him embracing God, embracing and clinging to his promises. And so what we do is we see his name being acted out. And this is really the theme of this book. This is really the main idea that we're going to find. It's going to be God's justice. And is God's justice done in the way that I think it should be done based on what I know about God? Or is maybe the what I know about God, I am superimposing what I think should happen? And how do I deal with what I know about God and justice not matching? How do I make them come together and make sense in my mind? Because when God doesn't act the way that I think he should act, does that mean now he's not the God that I thought he was? Because I've heard a lot of people will say, God wouldn't do that. If God does that, that's not the kind of God I would want to serve. But if God did do that, that's exactly the kind of God I want to serve. So how do I make sense when there's evil in this world? Is God still good? When children get hurt and God allows it, is that a blight on his goodness? Is that a blight on his grace and on his mercy? Is that what I know about God, that he is love and he's the epitome of love, and this world is so evil and his people are so evil, but he allows it? How do I bring those together? How do I make that make sense? And there's so many people, I think, in this world that are struggling with those exact questions. That is one of the main questions that we hear, not only from the lost, but from the saved. This is a question that Habakkuk deals with. This is one he's wrestling with. Lord, why are you allowing such evil? Why haven't you done anything? How often do we want to, but we've been taught not to? But how often do we want to go, God, why haven't you done anything? Why? Why are you letting this go on? Are you not the loving God that I've been told that you are? Is this not out of your character? You can't go against your character. So what if, how do I make these match? And that's what Habakkuk deals with. That's what we're going to study about. Is this wrestling that he does. And the answers that God gives Habakkuk is very surprising to him. It's very shocking to him. And it's definitely out of what he considers God's character. So the theme verse is Habakkuk 2:4. You will know it immediately, and the just shall live by faith. That's its theme verse. The just shall live. This is, if there's a popular verse in each book, this is Habakkuk's popular verse. It's quoted 3 times in the New Testament. It's quoted in Galatians 3:11. And on that one, the emphasis is on live. The just shall live by faith. This is how they live. This is how the just lives, by faith. It's the action of living, right? In Hebrews 10, the emphasis is on faith. How do they live? By faith. You get a hold of that faith, and that's how you live. You're just by that, right? So we see the emphasis in 2 different places in those. But then we see it again in Romans, and Romans 1:17, and there the emphasis is on who? Who shall live by faith? The just. If you're just, you will live by faith. And so it takes really 3 different times. Romans, Hebrews, well, with the exception of Hebrews, because we don't know for sure who wrote Hebrews. Paul takes three different places. We're gonna pretend Paul wrote Hebrews. I don't necessarily ascribe to that, but Paul and whoever, right, takes three different scriptures to explain the one verse in Habakkuk. The just shall live by faith. This is a command. This is an example. God speaks this, and we're going to see the actions play out in Habakkuk's response to him after in chapter 3. So just some ideas of the theme of who wrote it and who he was, of the main idea of Habakkuk. But still, we don't know the background, right? So I don't know how familiar you are with Israel's history for years and years and years. Most of my life, I was talking to Paula the other day, and we were talking, and I was like, for most of my life, I only knew, I think it was Paula I was talking about, I only knew a figment of it. Like you would hear, yes, I knew that the Israelites were exiled at some point in time. And I knew that, they fell back and forth and at some point in time. But I didn't truly understand the history of God's people. It's so important that we know the history of God's people. Why? Because that is our history. That is our spiritual history. I'm big into my family history. And I will be honest with you, I am not a history person. History was my least favorite subject in school growing up. You would not think that, seeing as how I got into my genealogy as strong as I did. I would understand the people that I wrote down in my genealogy. My great-great-great-great-grandfather was a Palatinate that came from Germany to New York, or from Germany to New York. But if I didn't understand what the Palatinate was, well, then all I knew is he came from Germany. Right? Or on my mom's side, I had the French Canadians who ended up becoming Cajun. Although we didn't do the Cajun part, but we did the French Canadian and understanding what the brides of the king. If I didn't understand what that was, then all I knew is that they were from France and they moved to Canada, and then that's it. That's fine. Like, I learned something, and I knew that they were from France. But to truly understand who they were and the struggles that they went through, without knowing the culture and what that meant, I just wouldn't get it. Right? And so, when was Habakkuk written? When did the events of Habakkuk take place? It would be a better term. The events of Habakkuk is debated when this took place. Very hotly debated in some places. And some places, I read more arguments this week about when Habakkuk took place. And I would say a good 35% of them were well over my head. They started talking things I had no understanding of whatsoever, which lets me know that I have gaps in my knowledge of what's going on, right? But by and far, I think the wisest place to put the events of Habakkuk is right before Judah's exile. Right before the exile of Judah. Some people put him in the reign of Josiah, and we're going to talk about him in a minute. Some people put him during the reign of Jehoiakim, which is what I believe. So let's go on. This would have been somewhere probably around 608 to 598 BC. Remember, we're in BC. Time goes backwards, right? It's not, 598 is not before 608. Paula. Wrong Paula. 608 is before 598. So when we start going through these dates, remember, the smaller the number, it happened after, right? I told her, Paula was like, I don't know, how did the sun rain? And I was like, remember, you're in BC. Remember, you're in BC. So it's backwards. They're backwards back then. So what's going on? Before we get into the history of, I don't know how many of you have lamented before God, have done a lament. That's a crying out of grief, a crying out of not understanding, a crying out of, Lord, I'm in this position. I don't know why I'm in this position. And you have me here, and God, I don't understand. And how often are we told that that is not okay? You're not in faith. You're not living a life of faith when you react to God like that. You should automatically just accept, know that He's going to be good and true and things are going to work out. And that's true. He is. But it is okay to lament. And we're going to see that in Habakkuk. We've seen it in Lamentations, which literally is lamentations. We see it in Job. We see it in the Psalms. It's okay. God knows your thoughts. He knows your emotions. It's okay to get real with him. He wants you to. And we're going to see that in Habakkuk. Because the first couple chapters, especially the first chapter of Habakkuk, is all about him lamenting. All about him complaining about what's going on in the world around him. Not in an unfaithful way. But in a, this is where I am, this is what I'm thinking, this is what I don't understand. This is what's not making sense to me, God. Most of y'all know my dad. I'm a daddy's girl. I've told y'all this over and over and over again. Watching my dad suffer for the past 20 years, like I've had to watch him suffer. Through blindness, through 2 different kidney transplants, through quadruple heart bypass, through not being able to walk, through all of the different things I've had to watch him do, and that has just attacked him. So many times I wanted to go, God, I don't get it. Why are you doing this? Why are you allowing this? He loves you. He is a man of God. I don't understand. And I would feel so guilty because I'd always been taught, you don't question God, you just trust him. But why can't I come to him with my feelings?
Sure.
And that's what Habakkuk tells me. Habakkuk says, come on with it. The prophet, the man who God talked with and talked with God, goes to him and goes, God, I don't get it. Why aren't you doing what I think you should be doing? So as we go through Habakkuk, these are some of the things that we will focus on. These are some of the things that we're going to notice. But before we get there, let's learn about Israel's background. So Israel, we're going to go way back before Habakkuk for a minute. So just hang with me, okay? Just because I don't know if you know. And it's better to cover it and know than not cover it and not know. Right? Okay. So Israel existed as one unified kingdom for all the time through David's rule, through Saul's rule, David's and Solomon's. But after Solomon died, the kingdom was divided into the northern and the southern kingdom, right? They had the northern kingdom of Israel, which was made up of 10 tribes. And those, it was just called the kingdom of Israel is what we typically call it. The tribes of Benjamin and Judah, as well as the tribe of Levi, remember they're not counted in one of the 12 because they're the priestly tribe, right? Those 3 tribes made up the southern kingdom of Judah. Okay, so they split, now they're under 2, and they each have their own set of kings, their own set of rulers. Some are good, some are bad. We see this. This is 1st and 2nd Kings, right? Around 725 BC, the Assyrians came. Israel was evil, doing all kinds of, offering their children to Molech and just sinning. They were unrepentant. 725 BC, the Assyrians came and they took Israel captive, right? And that was what we know as the exile. Typically when we talk about this is the Israelite exile. There are 2 exiles. For so long, I did not understand that, and it messed me up. And this is why I'm adamant. We've got to know Israel's history. And when I say Israel, I also mean Judah, right? Because they're part of the tribe. We need to know God's people's history. So anyway, they came in, they attacked Israel, they attacked its capital, which was Samaria at the time. That's in 2 Kings 17. In 725, Samaria falls, and the people are taken into captivity. Now, God allows this as a punishment. We know this part, right? God allows it as a punishment, as for justice for the sins that they have committed. That He's trying to get them to understand that their sins will be judged, right? They were unrepentant. So he comes in. Judah, the southern kingdom of Judah, those little 3 tribes, this is where Jerusalem is, okay? So this is the area that we're talking about. They watch what happens to the kingdom of Israel. Now, you would think that they would say, oh, I don't want that to happen to me. Let me get on the straight and narrow. We people are not that smart. We're not. Because they fall into the exact same thing. I say they fall into it. They've been doing it all along. God's justice was just detained with the kingdom of Judah, right? So they are going along that same path. So when Assyria took Israel, they ruled over Judah. They held them in a strong chokehold for a while. And Judah had to pay tribute to Assyria. Like, Assyria was the world domination power of the time, right? This is important because if anybody was going to take Judah into captivity, Judah would think it would be Assyria, because they're already kind of oppressing them and being that force in their lives. So after a series of evil kings in Judah, because Israel, the kingdom of Israel is now in captivity, there's a series of very evil kings in Judah. Judah is in a bad state spiritually. It's in a bad state politically. But particularly the ones like Manasseh. Manasseh was an evil man, right? And he reigned as king. And so Judah, and I've said this, people will follow their leader. There's a reason we have a game called Follow the Leader, because we naturally do that. If I have a leader that is running after God and people that are running after God, typically, herd's mentality, running after God. If I have an evil king who is bringing up idolatrous temples and high places and all of those things, and by example he's doing that, then I'm going to naturally follow and do the same thing. Hopefully not me personally, but we as a people will naturally follow the leader. So Manasseh took them into some evil life, right? They're in an apostate state, is where they are. So much so that Manasseh has his own little spiritual awakening and tries to get good, and the people don't follow because they are in such a state. However, after the assassination of the king that came, I think, after Manasseh, which was Ammon, after his assassination, Ammon's son took the throne. Now, Ammon's son at the time was 8 years old. His name was Josiah. 8 years old, and he is the king of such a corrupt land. But the Bible says that there was never anyone before or after that had a heart like Josiah did. He chased after God. Right? And Judah began to see a spiritual revival in the land during this time. Now, and y'all hang with me. I'm telling you about Josiah because Habakkuk, I believe, lived in the time of Josiah. Right? Based on where I believe the time period of Habakkuk took place, I believe that Habakkuk experienced this revival. And I think we can see that in his words when we see how he talks to God. So just kind of hang with me here. In 640 to 609 BC, Josiah reigned. We can see this in 2 Chronicles 34 and 35 and in 2 Kings 22 and 23. This was the reign of Josiah. He's a king who followed God. He sought to lead his nation back. He decided that he was going to get rid of all of the Baal temples, all of the Ashtoreth poles, all of the high places that were not of God, right? And then he said, well, we're also going to fix the temple. The temple it needs repairs, and we're going to fix it. And so he sends his high priest, and the high priest is working, and in the temple, and this is to explain just how bad Judah had gotten. In the temple, the high priest, finds the book of the law, which they believe is Deuteronomy. They believe that's what the book that he found was, Deuteronomy. And he had it read, right? He goes back, he takes it to, so this means at least we don't know how long, there was no book of the law being read. There was also no Passover being celebrated. So this is the state that Judah had gotten into. He takes the book of the law and he shows Josiah, who at this time is like 23 or something like that. He's a little bit older.
18. He was 16, and then I read this yesterday. He was 16, and then
Was it he was 16 or he he had done for 16 years.
No, he was 16 because he was still king when he was 18.
Well, he was king the rest of his life.
Yeah.
But anyway, so he's older. He's not 8, is my point. He is a little bit older here. The high priest comes. They have the book read to him, and Josiah begins to realize just how bad things were. And he tears his clothes and he repents, and he's determined now that we're going to make things right. We're going to get our nation back to God where it belongs. And so he goes about making all of these reforms, and he completely eradicates idolatry in Judah, right? And the people follow Josiah. They follow him into this great revival. How long have we cried out for revival in America, right? Well, Judah and Habakkuk and Jeremiah and Ezekiel, these guys, they're going through it, right? They see how great it is for a little bit. So Judah brings all of the people together, and he reads the law to them. He's like, you're listening. You're listening to the law. And they all repent with him. And they all make this new covenant with God, saying, hey, we're gonna stay in your way, stay in your covenant. We will follow your commands. We will do what you've called us to do. And so for several years, as that's going on, for several years, the Assyrian Empire, like I said, was the most powerful empire in the Middle East. They were responsible for the captivity of Israel, as we mentioned before. They conquered many other kingdoms, many other cultures. They would take the defeated people in as slaves. We know, they took them in.
Captivity.
Yeah, it took them in as captives, is what I was trying to say. Babylon was one of those people that was under Assyria's thumb. Okay, so this is important because Babylon revolts. Babylon's like, I'm tired of it. I'm done. So they begin to revolt, and they get help from the Medes and the Scythians, whoever they were. And so Babylon overthrows one of Assyria's chief cities. They overthrow Nineveh. And this was in 612 BC. Okay, still before Habakkuk's time of this book. But Habakkuk is there during this happening, right? So the Assyrians were not going to be able to hold the Babylons at bay by themselves. Babylon's gaining speed, gaining power, those kind of things. The Pharaoh of Egypt at the time is like, hey, I'm going to go in. I don't know that it's so much I'm going to help, but he wants to make sure that Babylon doesn't get power. And so he's making a march, him and his name was Necho, Pharaoh Necho. He decides that he's going to march to Haran, which is the city that's fixing to have the big fight. And he had warned him to do that. He has to go right by Judah. And he warned Judah, do not interfere. He warned specifically, he warned Josiah, do not interfere. Josiah does not listen. Josiah goes out and tries to stop Necho. And Necho kills him, right? He sees him in the way, shoots him with bow and arrow. Josiah says, hey, get me out of here, take me back. When they go back, he dies. When he dies, the people of Judah elect Josiah's youngest son. I don't know if it's younger, but a younger son. I can't think of his name off the top of my head. No, Jehoahaz. Jehoahaz as king. Jehoahaz gets to be king for a whole 3 months, right? He's evil, not a good king, but he gets to be king for a whole 3 months. This is where Judah, I think, probably at the last stages of Josiah's life has started to fall back into apostasy. But now that they have an evil king, they really go, right? So what happens is Necho, because he has killed the king of Israel, now kind of has some power, right? He does this little power play where he takes Jehoahaz captive, decides that Jehoahaz's older brother, Jehoiakim, is going to be king. And so he sets Jehoiakim up as king. I think probably he thinks Jehoiakim is going to serve him better. So he sets him up as king, and Jehoiakim is evil. He's an evil king. This is where I think Habakkuk in the book of Habakkuk comes in. He led the nation into an extremely apostate state, right? They were not even, when we go and we look at the events that Jehoiakim did, he tried to destroy the book with Jeremiah. You know, he kept throwing it in the fire, and he just did not care about God. And he led the people to not care about God. It was a horrific time in Judah's history, which means it was a horrific time in God's people's history, our people's. I'm not Jewish. Well, I mean, I have 0.1% possibly, according to my DNA, but I'm not Jewish, right? You're not Jewish, but it's still our people's history. It's our spiritual family's history. And it's a blight, really. Well, most of the Old Testament is a blight on our response to God and their response to God. But they had forgotten God. Judah had forgotten God. She'd given herself over to other gods. So what was the need of serving ours? Serving the true God. With sin and immorality rampant. The government corrupt, completely corrupt. Those who were in authority would not mete out justice equally. Your justice, your punishment was all about who you were, right? So there was complete lawlessness in the land. So not only was it corrupt spiritually, they were corrupt morally. They were corrupt. The government and stuff was corrupt. It was corrupt politically. There was no good at this time in Judah. And this is where Habakkuk comes in. This is where he's living. He's watching the people of God do atrocious things and seeing no justice in it. And this is when we'll see the very first couple verses, which we will not get to today, but the very first couple verses, we'll see it. We'll see him crying out because of the extreme fallen nature of the people. Not only the world, because we expect it from the world, but from God's people, from his chosen people. So you come into, a lot of times we've talked about this before, we expect nothing from the world if we're looking at it spiritually, right? Because they're lost. They don't understand the ways of God. But we expect a whole lot from God's people because they do know. They do know. And we're so quick to go, well, obviously you're not God's people. And that's kind of what Habakkuk's going, what? What is going on? God, these are your people. Why are you not meting out justice? Why are you not bringing them back to you? Why are you allowing this to go on? And that is where we're going to pick up in Habakkuk, the first chapter. So as we're studying through, I want, and I said all that just so you completely understand Habakkuk's state of mind. What's going around him politically? What's going around him? We see Assyria as the main power, but Babylon coming and growing in power, but not, it's still Assyria that's kind of, right now it's this battle between these two major, Nebuchadnezzar with the Neo-Babylonians and Assyria, and pretty soon, Assyria is going to go away and the Babylonians are going to be the power, right? But then the Babylonians, after Habakkuk, are going to get wiped out, but that's neither here nor there. But knowing it makes such a difference. And so as we read through Habakkuk, some of the things that that we're going to talk about, well, we're not even going to talk about that right now. Some of the things that we're going to talk about is how do we bring together evil and God? Evil in this world and the goodness of God. How do we reconcile those? Not only that, but how do we reconcile when God doesn't act in what we would consider a good way? What is good? Because sometimes I think what's good is just what I think feels right? But I don't see good necessarily the way God sees good. God's good is always good, whether I understand it or not. We're going to deal with that. We're going to deal with what is God's character when he's confronted with unrepentance? What is his character? What is the providence, the sovereignty of God, and what is man's part to play in it? If he's completely sovereign, do we have a part to play? Or does our part to play go into his sovereignty? And we're going to kind of wrestle with that. We will wrestle with how do we praise and cling and embrace God when our whole world is falling apart.
I just want to say something, because I was wrong. King Josiah was 26.
I know.
Well, I wanted to.
So those are some of the things that we are going to go on in these three little chapters. Has some big things that Habakkuk talks about, right? Some big things that we wrestle with still today. And I know, like, today was not your typical, right? It's not your typical, well, let's dig into these few verses. But if we don't understand what's going on, then we don't understand Habakkuk. We don't understand the extreme turmoil when he cries out to God. It's so important. I have no time, so I'm gonna. So next week we will start with verse 1. So, hope I didn't bore you too much. I hope you did maybe kind of understand a little bit more what's going on in Habakkuk's history and in Habakkuk's mind, because he's about to argue with God. And I love that he argues with God. I mean, I am a combative person by nature. I just am. And sometimes it's hard for me to just go, okay, God, my mind is blank of this. I'm not worried about this. I'm not. And it's okay to give me permission to go, okay, God, we got to talk about this, right? And that's where Habakkuk is. Lord, we got to talk. And so I can take great encouragement in that, and I hope y'all do too.
Well, if we had it made, then why would we want to go to heaven? There's a purpose here. The world is not perfect, so things will happen.
This world is far, far, far from
Sometimes he
perfect.
sees things that we don't see, like something worse coming in someone's future, and he decides to take them up, you know?
Right.
I don't, he has his reasons.
So you want us to study chapter 1?
I don't know how far we'll get in chapter 1. I am a little chatty. So, but yeah, if y'all want to study chapter 1, that is definitely where we're starting.